nod, panelists, if you think I should make a start. Lovely. And everybody. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know many people came at 5 and watched the film then, but I just wanted to do a little brief introduction again. I'm Michelle Aaron, the Director of Screening Rights Film Festival, Social Justice Film Festival in the Midlands, that will be having its 6th run at the end of October. And for the first time, we're going digital. And we're delighted this evening to be having this as our first ever digital event. We hope it's not too experimental as a digital event, but we're with some very experienced panelists and have got great support from City of Culture. Thank you to them, and from Anya Ostrutka, who's the coordinator for the festival this year. I finally just have to say thank you to the University of Warwick and the Humanities Research Fund and GRP Connecting Cultures for supporting the festival and this event this year. One thing I do need to say, if you didn't hear already, we are recording this discussion. If you don't wish to be recorded, please switch off your video so that that doesn't happen. Thank you again to everybody for joining, especially the family members and the panelists. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Rajinder, who's going to be chairing this session. Over to you, Rajinder.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to see so many boxes on the screen, so I'm just echoing the joy there. I'm Rajinder Dudrah, so I'm based at Birmingham City University, and I'll be chairing this evening. What I'm going to do is introduce our panelists, and then we're going to have a short discussion between the panelists and myself. And I really want this to be a space for all of you to join in as well, if you wish. We've got about an hour, so we can certainly use that hour, or we'll play it by ear in terms of your comments and discussions. So there's a comments section, which my colleagues Michelle and Caris will be watching. So do feel free to put your comments in there as well as we're talking, if anything comes up, and they'll try and put them forward to us. But then once we stop talking, I'm going to come back to you. And if you've got any, not just questions, but comments or observations, if you'd like to share some of your own stories, perhaps, that have been touched or reinvigorated as a result of watching this film. So please, let's add that to the conversation. And it would be really great that rather than I take your questions and I'm just reading them out and then we respond as a panel, please feel free and feel encouraged to, if you want to, raise your hand or let the moderators know that you do want to come on, and then obviously unmute your microphone and put your video on, and then you'll be in live connection with the panel as well. But of course, by doing that, you will be recorded, just to remind you again. So if you didn't want to do that, then obviously use the comments section. So to introduce our panel, we've obviously got the filmmakers, but also we've got two colleagues, two comrades who've been part of the struggle. And I think that is an important word. When you're talking about injustice, you also talk about keywords like struggle, power, politics, which are all at play here. So if I may, please, I'd like to introduce first of all, Janet Alder. Janet, would you mind just waving so people can know? Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much. Janet Alder is the sister of Christopher Alder, who was unlawfully killed by police officers in Hull in 1998, and she has campaigned for justice for her brother ever since then. We also have Marcia Willis Stewart QC, Honourable QC. Marcia, would you just give us all a wave, please? Thank you, Marcia. Marcia is an award-winning civil rights lawyer. Some of you will probably recognise her for the wonderful work she's been doing over a number of years and decades, possibly through civil society and on TV. But also she's represented the Mark Duggan family at his inquest. And I mean, her list of achievements is impressive. And she also helps and encourages through mentoring young Black and ethnic minority lawyers as well. We also have the two filmmakers, Tariq Mehmood and Ken Fero. Quick wave, please. Thank you. Yes, power salute. Thank you very much. And they're part of Migrant Media, which is a collective of radical filmmakers embedded within communities of social and political interest and from Black and migrant backgrounds. Their work has a focus on race and class with a central narrative of resistance. So thank you ever so much for taking time out for this. I must admit, this was the first time I've had the opportunity and privilege an awakening to watch this film. So thank you very much for sharing it. I had been aware of it, but for a number of reasons or another, I just didn't get around to watch it. So watching it was, I'll be honest, it was very emotional. It was very tearful, but also it was a film again of its time. I couldn't believe that this was 20 years. Watching it and seeing the footage, obviously it took me back to almost kind of like documentary footage, which you knew through the, if you like, the dress and people's fashion sense, that this was, you know, a decade or two old. But it just seemed too true and too timely, not least in 2020. So if I may, please, I'll come over to Janet and Marcia first. Janet, your own struggle, your own story of kind of survival and resistance are part of this. How did you become part of the film after the incident, and how did you feel willing and able to share your stories?
Yeah. Well, when Christopher had died, I was, you know, I felt really, really isolated. And then what I started to do was branch out to other families. And I met up with Ken and Tariq and many other families, you know, around the country. And you just felt a solidarity with them, you know. You know, the cases were so similar. The way that our loved ones were tracked by the police and that was so similar. So it was like a bit of a safety blanket for us, you know, to actually get together and know that we weren't on our own. And yeah, there was people out there really willing to battle and stand by us.
And being part of this film, I mean, is it, because we saw some stories and there was moments where people were saying that, you know, I've never spoken. I think it was one of the mothers of the victim. I think it was Joy's mother, and she said, you know, I've always seen myself as timid and quiet, but there she was out there speaking vociferously, passionately, and actively. I mean, what was that process like for you? Was it that this is?
Yeah, me myself, I'd always been quite a private person, and kind of getting thrust into the forefront like that did make me feel quite uncomfortable. But deep down inside, you know that it's something that you've got to do, and you can't just allow this type of thing to happen. So, you know, over a period of time, you know, you get more confidence, the more people you're around, you know, and you realise that you're all in the same position. And as your voice gets stronger and stronger, do you know what I mean? You also, you know, gain strength from that. And other people around supporting you as well gives you the confidence to go, do you know what I mean, to fight for the truth. And it's something that you feel inside, you can't help it, there's something in there, you know, justice becomes so important to you. And, you know, that's where it's like being wound up and then let go, and then that's it, basically.
Right. And does it feel like, I mean, you've seen the film, and obviously the film took a number of years to make, but does it feel like 20 years for you? Have we moved on, or does it, like I said at the opening, for me, this was just too raw? Have things moved on, or is this a text of its time, or it's relevant now? No,
that film is as relevant now as it was, you know, because things haven't changed. There's been little baby steps, you know, we've had some little achievements over the years, but I mean, there's still people dying. So to me, it just feels like this is just continuous. Yeah. I feel exactly the same, as passionate as I felt from day one. And especially when you see all the other families, you know, the grieving families, more and more every year when we go to the March in 10 Downing Street, and that just kind of reignites everything that you know, and everything that you've been feeling, and it makes it more and more important to get out there and support each other and, you know, fight for the truth.
Thank you, Janet. If I may come over to Marcia now, please. Marcia, how did you get involved in the film? I think you're muted, Marcia.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't in the film, but many of the cases that I know about and colleagues were in the films. So I wasn't in the film, but I think I want to just say I absolutely agree with Janet. Having watched the film again, and you know, you think, hang on, that was 20 years ago, and we are still we are here. You know, there will be a march in Tottenham on the weekend to actually raise that point, that very point again. You know, Cynthia Jarrett, Joy Gardner, you know, Mark Duggan, to name but a few. And the truth is, the injustice, it still goes on. And we've seen in the context of stop and search that this still goes on, and there are challenges in respect of the ongoing racism in relation to, as I say, for example, stop and search, and there's work that Stopwatch are doing right now to look at this again, because it continues.
And we're watching this film in the context of 2020. There's a pandemic right now, which is why we're on Zoom, but also Black Lives Matter, rightly so, has been reinvigorated in a global way. The killing of George Floyd, which has reignited and reinvigorated debates and cases across the UK. What does it mean to be watching and thinking and talking about this film in 2020 for you, Marcia? Is this like the work needs to carry on, the struggle carries on, or actually this is almost a kind of we're at a crossroads moment. There's something interesting, exciting happening, or we still have to be very cautious?
The work has to carry on because the struggle carries on and the injustice has continued. When I watched the film again, as someone been raised in the church, and the theme tune was "Farther Along, You'll Know All About It. Farther Along, We'll Understand Why." And I have to say, I was thinking, how much farther along will we have to continue worrying about this? How much farther along will we understand why? It is, but within that, there is a time, it feels as if, you know, it's a time of a revival. It's a time where it doesn't just seem like it's my struggle or Janet's struggle, or it's a struggle for everyone. And I think that's why we do have to continue. We have to garner strength and gain strength and seek strength in this time of the pandemic to continue. And continue we must, because the struggle continues. As a lawyer in this, you know, doing this work, you know, I often get asked, how do I continue? And I feel as if sometimes I ask myself the same question, how do I continue? But I know I have to continue. And I know that many lawyers that do. I mean, I was thinking only about Janet the other night because I was talking about Ruth Bundy, a champion. I mean, champion in you know, in Leeds. And you know, still going strong, you know, but a champion. And, you know, she is somebody who has actually been in the business of fighting justice on behalf of all of those who, you know, facing social inequality and racism much, much longer than I, and still continues. And we have to I look at somebody like Ruth and I think, I've got yards to go yet. Yards to go.
And you're right to recall and remember these names, because it shows that we're part of this long history and tradition of struggle and opposition to resistance. And watching those films again, some of those names I remember reading in the press, you know, growing up over the last couple of decades, and then just seeing those stories come to life, I think was very powerful and emotive in a number of ways. And really the final question to you before I move on to Ken and Tariq, as a QC, as a lawyer then, what do you see as the relationship between this kind of media? I mean, this is a documentary medium, or a film if you like. Does a medium like this have an impact on the law, or the ability to activate a community, activate people around the law? Is there a relationship there between this kind of media and the work that you do?
There is a relationship. There is a relationship there. But, you know, I have, interestingly, in Bernberg's, you know, this week, we have sent a message around about all of these films that are being shown and reshown, so that the younger generation, I mean, you do, you know, the young people who don't know they don't know about poll tax, you know, they don't know about, you know, they're studying the miners' strike in history. Those of us who, of course, it is our history, but it's not so far away. And I think that there is an absolute place for these films, even though, you know, we are, you know, in a time when sound bites are so key, and you know, there's this whole thing about, you know, the first 3 minutes are the most valuable. That's when the message needs to go out, and so there are issues about presentation. But I think that certainly when the film was shown in London at Conway Hall, I think it was oversubscribed, and I gather the police had to come. So there is a place, and you know, I was raised with the mantra: if you fail to know your history, you're destined to repeat it. So there is a place, and it's a means of telling the story. And actually, Janet spoke of the strength gained from speaking to other families and connecting with people all across the country. And in this time of COVID, it may be a means of reigniting that relationship and those relationships. So I think, and reminding us lawyers that, you know, we need to actually hit the streets running and still continue to do the work that we do.
Thank you very much, Marcia. I may come over to Ken and Tariq. So congratulations again on this film. It's 20 years old. It's been round the world, and rightly so, shown at numerous film festivals, received a number of awards. But if I may, before we talk a bit more about the kind of nuts and bolts and the aesthetics of the film, Channel 4 has as yet not shown this film, and I hope I understand in the chat box there's a link to a petition going around that Channel 4 should be showing a film like this. Can we just say a bit more? I'll come to Ken first and then Tariq. Could you just say a bit more about the kind of film, the story you think you've told, and why you think Channel 4, which has been a bastion of Black, Asian and minority ethnic representation in the past, or at least on the surface of it, has not want to show this film, chooses not to choose this film? What's going on there? Ken? Ken, you're muted.
I think that's what Channel 4 would like, to mute me. Basically, I think that what you have to understand in terms of the making of the film, this is a time capsule of that particular period. It started, we filmed, we stopped. We could have done it 5 years before. We could do it now, and we have been making films. So I think it's not so much of the product, but the process of making the film. And the process of making this particular film formed the United Families and Friends campaign. It wasn't just about making a film. It was not just about recording the stories. It's not about presenting the victims. It's about presenting the resistance and the process of resistance, because when people today see this film, when young people today see this film, they can see the process of resistance, how people change and how the families took control of their struggle. And that's a very important position that we took. It wasn't about the support that was coming from different organizations. It was about them controlling their struggle. So this kind of filmmaking, of kind of process journalism, which is organic and supports the families to develop themselves. And that's why Myrna took the road she took, because she felt it was supported. That's why all the families and all the women, particularly the Black women in the film, became so powerful, because we gave them a space to develop without sticking the camera in their face 2 minutes after their loved one had been killed. We didn't do any interviews until 5 years after these cases. And that was very important, because it meant that the families became the experts legally, medically, philosophically, politically. And I think that was very important. And of course, they're supported by their lawyers and by other people in the film, you can see. So I think that's a very different way of filmmaking than Channel 4 is used to, that Channel 4 promotes. And so it was a challenge just because of the process and the structure, although they did recognize as a way of making films, it was something they wanted to support. And after they rejected the film, they wrote to all their preferred suppliers to say, please come up with films like this, because we actually like this approach, but of course we won't show injustice. So I think we had a history of working with Channel 4 before. We made a film called Justice for Joy, Justice Denied, which was about the death of Joy Gardner. The anniversary, 27-year anniversary, was on 28th, so 2 days ago. And that was how we began getting into this issue. And as we went through with the Joy Gardner case, and then all these other cases started to come up, the film just grew, as did the movement, and it worked together perfectly. The two things were hand in hand. When we finished the film, we approached Channel 4. They denied it. I won't go into all the details of the bannings and the threats and everything else, maybe later on. But essentially, Channel 4's position was, we can't show this film because it's libelous. And it is libelous. We made a libel film because for us, the right to life is more important than the law of libel. So that was a moral decision we took. Nevertheless, the fact that the film covers cases where there is clearly murder and manslaughter, and I use those words very carefully within the legal context, the fact that the police then decided not to take us to court for libel after we showed it indicates something. More than anything else, to our mind, it indicates that the police officers were responsible for those deaths and were not prepared to go to court to defend themselves. They were prepared to go to inquests, but not to court. And we challenged the police to that we would take them to court for lack of earnings. And they suddenly realized that we were serious, and they completely backed off. So 13 police officers who were named as murderers within the film decided not to take legal action against us. Now, that was a victory, I think, and I was told it was a victory by many people. We were told that. Unfortunately, Channel 4 didn't share that position, despite the fact that we took on the police federation with the families and won. The families took on the CPS and won. There were many victories through the making of the film and the families coming together. And Channel 4 had a historic opportunity to show the film then. And I would go as far as to say that some of the deaths we've had in the past 19 years may not have happened if Channel 4 had taken a decision then. Because it would have, I think the kind of debate we're having today, or should be having today, could have happened 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that, I know that's quite a heavy accusation to make, but I stand by it.
You can, and you have that. Now, I think you're showing your cards. You weigh your politics on this. This is a very political film, and rightly so, in both the big P and perhaps the small P sense of the word. Tariq, this film was made 5 years after the event, as Ken has just told us. As a filmmaker, as an artist, as an agitator, as an activist, of all those things that drive us. Where does one start? Because in some senses, this almost has got a kind of a detective narrative. You're putting pieces together for the viewer. You're also questioning and interrogating the police, the legal system. But after 5 years, things could get lost, or the scent could go cold, to use that kind of vocabulary. Where does one start, and how does one pick up the threads, the storyline, to make it into the film that it comes 5 years after the event?
I think firstly, it's important to recognize that the film doesn't exist without the resistance of the families of those who have been killed, right the way through then in the process of its making. And here Ken is the master filmmaker. I'm a bit of an agitator and a storyteller. So, and also ever since the film has been made, is it the film that is alive, or is it the resistance of the families that has kept the hope in justice alive? And in that context, there's a natural marriage of the film Injustice and the struggle for justice for those who've lost their loved ones. So in a sense, we don't see a disconnect between our basic beliefs as people, and that is that we have a fundamental right to life. Now, when Ken was talking about we welcomed, come and prosecute us, that's what they were saying, it's libelous, so come, prosecute us. We're happy to go to court, take us to court. They didn't. But on the other side to it, whilst we won't go into details, but the younger ones watching should search the details, they closed cinemas down where people from different parts of the world had come, even ambassadors had come up. The police federation did not want to know what was going on in the stories that we were narrating. They didn't want to know. And what is the story? It's so simple. The boys in blue should be treated when they kill like me and you. There's nothing complicated about that. It's very simple. But they get away with it, like Ken had pointed out earlier, and Janet has articulated more than once, and so have other families. They literally are getting away with murder. And by not airing the views of those who have died. No punches pulled, straightforward, by not airing the views and capitulating to the power of the police federation. You are actually colluding, not just in the old injustice, but in the present injustice. Isn't it ridiculous that 19 years on, here we are talking about Channel 4, why aren't you showing the film? Why? What is it? It's a film. It's a narrative of history, whether like it or not. These are events that have taken place. So in one sense, where do you start? You start with the belief that we actually believe in the people with whom we were working. We believe in the story, and it is not simply a narrative of resistance, but it's also a narrative of hope. Because so long as you resist, you can't resist for hopelessness. You have to resist that one day I will get justice. And for those, you know, every time I see the film, I cry. I can never, ever watch the words, my tears will catch them, without just bursting out in tears. I can't do it. Now, so in one sense, the film, Janet, like you were talking about the point of, you know, the breaking of isolation. Well, all of us as individuals and people, we'd really isolated until we get together and fight. And what Ken's fantastic organization had done of migrant media was that we were able to give voice long before the internet, where you could just plug in and talk to each other. And Marcia, when she refers to Ruth Bundy, marvelous human beings who have supported the people of resistance. If it wasn't for her and people like her, I could have been in jail for 44 years. Another story. But it's the great support of people like that. So where do we start? We have a story to tell. The story deserves to be told. And whether somebody wants to hear it or not, the families of those who have been killed are saying you're going to hear it. It doesn't matter what you do. And until we are heard, until the fundamental changes are made, that the culture which can allow their police officers to know it doesn't matter if they kill. It doesn't matter how brutally they kill. It's much worse than America. They shoot you there. Here they strangle you with their hands and they burn the evidence in full knowledge. But I leave all that to Janet and people to talk. We will just stick to the thing that our primary is as a service to the struggle of people wanting justice. So for us, the starting point is always at the point of struggle.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to invite our audience members, our online audience members. Is there anybody at this point who would like to come in with any questions or comments to any of the panel members, to Janet, Marcia, or Ken or Tariq at this stage? And if you do want to come on, just unmute your microphone and put on your video, and of course you will be filmed. I'm just going to wait a few seconds if someone would like to come forward. Questions or comments from anybody? There is Claire. I'm seeing Claire on my screen. So Claire, that's the couple in the screen. If you would unmute your microphone and come on video. Good evening.
Hi. Thank you so much. The film was really. Can you hear?
Could you speak up or come a bit closer to the microphone, please? Please.
Far away. Can you hear properly?
That's better.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ken and Tariq. The film was really powerful, and to all the families affected. I mean, it's shocking how we watched it last night for the first time, and how shocking it is to the echoes of injustice now and around the world too. But to happen in the place where we live is very powerful. The question I had, and I read a little bit about it, is that, and you mentioned a little bit about how when it was screened, the police were threatened cinemas and places showing it. Can you expand a bit about that? Because that is a bit of a hidden thing that we don't know much about, really, about, you know, that kind of thing can happen, that kind of censorship, really. And we think about, you know, I'm from Hong Kong originally, and, you know, we think about sort of China's grip on Hong Kong and censorship kind of in other countries, but not in this country. So can you kind of tell us a bit more about how your film was, not just by Channel 4, but by independent cinemas who were kind of shut down by the police, in a sense? Thanks.
Thank you. Ken or Tariq?
I'm unmuted, so I'll go first. I think the issue of censorship is important, but I think you have to consider the issue of self-censorship as well. because I think self-censorship in this country is quite extreme on this issue. The board of film censorship in this country doesn't consider politics as it does in other countries. Politics is part of film censorship in many countries in the world. It doesn't take a part here because the industry self-censors itself so much, there's no need to have a censorship board. So I think in the context of that, on this issue certainly, before we made Injustice, nobody had ever counted the number of deaths that had happened in the 30-year period. Nobody at all. There were organizations like Inquest who'd been counting as the years went on, but nobody had actually counted the global amount within journalism. Now, how can you have a country which prides itself on the BBC to have never done a basic empirical count of the deaths and come to this figure of 1,000? It was just, that's the context we're coming out of. So when you put across a simple fact like that, and it's undeniable, the reaction of the state is obviously to try and prevent you saying that. And the things, as Tariq was saying, were very simple. You know, what the families are saying is very simple. The cases may get complex later, it may get complicated, but the message is very clear and very simple. And I think the idea of censorship in this country, in my experience, is one of class as well. There's a certain class of people who are making these films for Channel 4 and for BBC. There's a certain agreement within that class that dominates our media of what can and cannot be dealt with. Yeah, and so all of these, this is the environment we were working in, and we should never have made Injustice, according to them. The only reason we made it is that the process of work that we go through is important for us, much more important than the film that we make. And when I was talking about the 5 years, I didn't mean we didn't get involved for 5 years. What I meant is that we filmed for 5 years and then we edited it.
Right.
And I think that's what came out of the film, and that's what the Channel 4 and others didn't like. Now, and when we finished the film, we were looking in terms of how do we present this film, and we decided we would call it Human Rights Abuses. Now, this was in the early 90s when the Human Rights Act wasn't in place properly, and human rights wasn't on the agenda as it is today, and it has been for the past 2 decades. But at that stage, it was still in the early stages. And when we said this was a film about human rights abuses in the UK, it wasn't liked at all. They didn't like it. And when we had our first screening, we decided to hire a cinema in central London. In fact, the first screening was in Jamaica in tribute to Brian Douglas, who was one of the cases in the film, but people don't talk about that because it was Jamaica, and so that doesn't count to some people. But anyway, that's another story. So we hired the cinema in London, and we decided, okay, well, who are we going to invite? Obviously, the families were there, and comrades and friends along the way, and journalists. And we decided to invite the ambassadors of every single country that the UK had accused of human rights abuses. And that's a lot of countries. And the ambassador of Iran came, and of Cuba, and of many, many countries. And they came to watch a film. They sat down, China as well, they sat down and they waited and they waited. And of course, the Police Federation threatened the cinema and it was pulled. So you can imagine when these people sat down, these ambassadors sat down and had this experience of censorship as it was, they became our friends. And soon the Attorney General was our enemy, and the head of broadcasting in Iran was our friend, and that became the power politics we had to play to get the message across. And so after that, because of the police threats to the cinemas, they never threatened us. We were personally threatened, but we weren't threatened by the Police Federation or through the police officers in the film. They threatened every cinema basically that was going to show it. And Marcy mentioned that after the first screening was pulled by the Metro Cinema, we decided to hire Conway Hall, which we were told was a bastion of free speech. And we went to Conway Hall and we said, this is a film about human rights abuses. They said, it's okay, we can show it here, we'll take the risk. We even let the National Front speak here. Okay, that's not a great pedigree, but anyway, we just went on. And then we, to our surprise, the head of what it's called, the board of Conway Hall decided at the 11th hour to pull this film. And then obviously the families had had enough by then. We barricaded the doors, climbed through, had to eject the management from the building, and the film was shown. And it was quite an event, and it became the front page of the Metro the next day, and then it just escalated. And we spent the next 6 months, I think, going up and down the country, having screenings planned, and then the police would threaten the venue, and every single time the venue would pull it, and we understood that, and we had no conflict with the venue. On the same evening, every time the film was cancelled, somebody in the audience would get up and say, I run a school, I run a squat, I own a pub, we're going to show the film tonight. And it was shown every single time. And I think the police realized after that there was no way they would stop the film. And then the press took it up, and there were many, many people in the press who were really progressive and felt the time was right. We unleashed a feeling that was there, and we gave people the courage to speak out. And they got that courage to speak out because they saw the families speaking out. And anybody that listens to these families speaking out and doesn't take action, you know, is not courageous, I would say. And that includes Channel 4.
Some great instances of real kind of evidence, historical evidence along the way. Thanks for sharing that. I've got 2 questions going, which is great. So I'm going to come to Mahmood next, but first I'm going to go to Helen. Helen, I understand, has a question for Janet. So Helen, if you could, thank you, you're coming up, unmute your microphone on the screen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Fab.
Janet, you might unmute.
It's sort of for Janet, but Marcia might also have perspective on this. So one of the things that really struck me when I was watching the film was how very composed and articulate the families of the victims of these crimes were in interviews with the filmmakers, but also in other media interviews, so in talking to the press in general. And I was thinking about the fact that often victims of crime, the families of victims of crime are given kind of support and coaching for those kinds of appearances by the police and by the police's own communications team. And I wondered, Janet, if you'd had any support in like how to approach being interviewed on camera, both at the time of your brother's death, but also sort of subsequently as well. Is there any support for people whose family die in custody of that kind?
No, there isn't any support whatsoever. It's you know, when you first start, it's really new to you and you're very nervous and things like that. But I mean, I'm not one of those that's always been calm. I'm very, very vocal, and I just open my mouth and I say what I think. And when you're in that situation, you're actually speaking about, you know, your loved one's death and that. I don't think that kind of thing crosses your mind to whether you're being calm or, you know what I mean, whatsoever. You just want to get the story out. You want people to see, do you know what I mean, exactly what is going on. And I think just over a period of time, we probably learn from each other. And the fact that we, you know, Ken and Tariq have filmed us, do you know what I mean? I suppose that has helped us in a way, because, you know, we're in relaxed circumstances with them. So I suppose that's a type of a training as well for us. You know, it's encouraged us and given us a bit of confidence. Yeah, and I think that's why you'll see a lot of families composed. You know, we was in a comfortable position, you know, with sitting with Ken and Tariq. They believed in what we was doing, so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We didn't have to scream.
I can completely see that. I also wonder about, you know, people that are interviewed on the steps of police stations, in the middle of protests, you know, outside courts, when tempers are really, like, you know, feelings are really running high. It must be really difficult to be as articulate as everybody seems to manage to be. I'm just really in awe.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you ask Ken, he's seen me in plenty of circumstances. Marcia, you've seen me when I, you know, kind of lose it in these circumstances. When I'm speaking to authorities, I'm speaking to somebody completely different, you know, than the ordinary people. And I believe that it's them that should get the passion. You know, they're the ones that need to know exactly how you feel and how they've made you feel. So there, you know, there is a big difference being in the, you know, standing on the steps, you know, shouting at the authorities, and there is when you're, you know, in a comfortable position with Tariq and Ken.
Marcia, did you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know any, certainly any client of mine or within, or any families who've had, as it were, PR or witness, you know, had been coached. What I am constantly amazed and amazed at how families are able to speak when they need to speak, but it's because they are speaking their truth, and somehow, you know, and especially supported by other families, they are able to speak because they are speaking the truth. They are speaking the truth, and they're asking those people, those, you know, as Janet said, those people in power, to speak their truth. And because it's not coming back, you know, it's almost as if they're gaining strength day by day, and it's not easy. You have the moments of utter despair and darkness, but I'm telling you, it's because they are speaking their truth.
Thank you. I'm going to read out a question. It is a question from
Raj,
Mom.
can I interrupt you? Sorry, because there's, I just wanted, because Carla Cumberbatch is here, and it's a case from only a couple of years ago.
Is this related to the same question, Ken?
Very connected, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
Janet made a reference
Then
to
we'll go to Mahmood. Carla, do you want to, so Ken has put in the chat room, Carla Cumberbatch. What about
Hi, Ken.
Hi,
Carla?
Hi, my name's Carla, and reflecting back on what Janet's just said, I'm relatively new to this because my brother's case was in 2017, and I felt isolated, I felt trapped, and I did keep what I thought to myself. But recently, I found the courage and the support to step out and say exactly what's been going on, and answering the lady's question that she just asked. It is frustrating calling on authorities and challenging them and trying to hold them to account, but at the same time, there's still a trauma and a frustration there. And every time you go and you get knocked back, you've got to go back again and again. And I know that I've only been doing this for a short period of time. So for people like Janet and people like Ken, and looking into the old cases, it makes you really realise, like, you're saying, why should it be shown on Channel 4? It should be shown because there's 60 plus years of failed injustices, and the state and media choose to pick and choose when to air it. It's only maintained when, okay, I've got solidarity with America, but I respect England because that's where I'm from. And in England, we've got major issues, as you reflect on the pandemic, which is why we're all in a Zoom. There's things that have been failed for many years that get ignored. Like, this isn't just one aspect. And if there's no relevance and there's no accountability and no one's airing it, where's the awareness? And who do you go to? So without these things being aired and people seeing the raw graphicness that the users have all got to see, for them to pull a plug on it and not hold the filmmakers or Tariq, it sends a message out by them not trying to get them arrested or challenge them or make them liable for the film. They look like they've got guilty hands to me. And that's just from a different perspective, because when you're looking at all these different varieties, they've all got a pattern, they've all been failed. Like Marcia Willis Stewart said, for her to be fighting this and looking at these cases, it's frustrating because when does it change? Is it going to change? When does it move forward? When are people going to start addressing these areas that they choose to ignore? Sorry for waffling on.
No, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Carla. Thank you. I'm going to, this is a question from Mahmood Khan. Thank you very much for putting that in the chat box. I'm going to read it as best as I can. And he says, the problem of arresting people and being dead while being arrested is viral all over the world. How do you think the values of the movie can be scaled in countries where freedom of speech is highly restricted? Do you believe creating similar documentary movie in these countries will have an impact, given the restriction in these countries? Screenings can start abroad, for example. So I suppose this is one for all the panel, but also anybody else who wants to come here. So this is about a global issue we've seen around the world. We also mentioned, somebody mentioned from the Claire box, I'm seeing Claire, but it was whoever speaking from the box in Claire, the China, the Hong Kong issue. There are other instances from around the world. So can a film like this be shown in other instances, or could a similar documentary be made in that context to galvanize change, I suppose? So anybody from the panel, Tariq, would you like to try and respond to that first of all? And anybody else who wants to come in, either from the audience or from other members of the panel, please do as well. Tariq. You're muted, Tariq, sorry.
we can't speak for the globe. Every country, every society has its own problems. We must try to resolve the problems in the place that we live. By our act of fighting for the rights and the fundamental basic of all rights, the right to life, let alone a life with dignity, we are setting that example to others elsewhere. I do not wish to indulge in places I don't understand. It's not our primary fight, but we stand in solidarity with others, is all I would like to say. But most importantly, really, that all of those who are watching beyond the parameters of making a film, you've all got a role to play. You can even assist us as filmmakers. You can, get the petition that we're doing to force Channel 4 to screen. And one day I have no doubt they will screen. If they're still around, one day they will. They have no choice in that matter, because people's demands can only be held back for a certain period in time. But most importantly, you can get involved in this injustice and others that are around you. They're not different. And when I was listening to Carla, none of us were born with educational tools of how to deal with these things. Struggle teaches you. There's no better teacher than the right to ask for the basics. So that's all I would like to say to that question. I think that each society has to produce its own, if you want to look at documentary, that. And the person who'd asked the earlier question, if you go on the Migrant Media website, you will find 2 articles by Ken and I about the making of the film and the impact of the film. They're quite old, but they are quite detailed and listed of what was happening to us at the time.
Wonderful, thank you for that response. Would anybody from the audience, anybody else like to come in? Anybody else from the audience? Okay, that's fine. Do we need Channel 4 in this moment? I'm just thinking, we're watching this film in 20... Ken, I'll just come to you. We're watching this because I think this...
No, Claire had a point.
Oh, sorry, Claire, I missed you. Come in, Claire.
Hi, thanks for the film. Obviously, with Black Lives Matter movement going on in our recent kind of experience and reality, it has really shown us, I would say, the deepest end of racism. I think racism comes in all shapes and shades. The most nuanced might be just ignoring people, and the worst is really to kill people. And then we're talking about killing people, killing innocent people, and it's the system, the governmental system that does it. And we're trying to demand justice from the very system. So they are the judge and the jury. And it's really, really hard by its nature. And my question is, as we fight along the way, obviously all shades and shapes of racism must end. But we are talking about the worst form. And can we actually bring this issue forward in legal framework, but outside of the kind of national border? Has there been any kind of proceeding going on, say, at the Human Rights Court? Is that the one in the Netherlands? And so forth. Are things happening in that area? That's what I'm wondering.
Okay. Maybe that's a question for Marcia with your legal hat on, possibly?
There are, within our jurisdiction, there are cases that are brought almost, they're going on an ongoing basis, but there are no cases that are brought as a mass in the they're not brought collectively, they're brought individually. And there are cases that go through our legal system and then into the European Court. I mean, as a struggle, but in terms of bringing the cases jointly and bringing the organisations to book jointly, that has not been done. It is something that we continue to look at, but at the moment, cases are being fought on an individual basis.
Thank you, Marcia.
Janet.
Michelle had her hand raised, and then we'll come to Janet. Sorry, Janet, did you want to come in on that point there, Janet? You're muted. And then I'll come to Michelle. Janet and then Michelle.
Just to say that Christopher's case is one of the cases that did manage to get to the European courts. We've been through all the processes, you know, in the UK, and the doors had been closed at every step of the way. And it took us from I think we set it up in 2003, and it actually happened in 2011. And it took the government had been in denial all that time, and it took going to the European Court for them to concede and admit that Christopher's death was inhumane and degrading, and that his right to life had been denied. But once we'd had that admission, nothing happened. So it was a kind of like empty kind of a procedure. I think the government had just done it, you know, to try and get it off their hands. And can I just come back to, like, you know, like the film? If Channel 4 were to show this now, what it would show that this is systematic. This has been there's a catalogue of cases, and it's been going on since well before, you know, the film was made. The film's highlighted these cases, and it's still going on today. And that's why I think that Channel 4 is frightened to actually show this film.
Thank you, Janet. Michelle.
I just wanted to respond to Mahmood's question before, and Tariq gave a fantastic answer, but I did want to add about the potential of film. I think what's really changed in how technology has changed in the last few decades, and we see with different kinds of uprisings and wars, conflicts, etc. around the world in the last decade, the use of mobile phone technology. And we see film as this possibility for agency. It's about giving voice, as has been spoken of, and bearing witness and recording history that isn't changed or altered and therefore has to be revisited, as we've been saying. But it's also a tool for those individuals in countries where there isn't freedom of speech, but also where the chance of that voice being heard is so limited and constrained. And God knows, we know so many films that have been made during the Arab uprisings. Many of the people who were recording that material in Syria, for example, right at the beginning, have died during those conflicts as well. But the film actually made it out of the countries and has made it into documentaries since. So documentary, you know, documentary is quite different from this one, are very much a place where, whether it's about recording human rights abuses through a organization like Witness, if you look it up, which is about training people to use their cameras, the cameras on their phones around the world to record these human rights abuses, that they can be brought to play in legal cases, or whether it's about, you know, recording stories, giving a voice to experiences and to horrendous atrocities that are happening that then do get shared abroad and they get smuggled out, etc. Film is an incredibly useful tool, and certainly part of the role of Screening Rights Film Festival is about interrogating its potential as this tool, not to laud up and celebrate human rights as something that it achieves, but rather to kind of scrutinize its potential for changing things.
Thank you, Michelle. It's really good to remind us that. Oh, I think Mahmood has just come in there. So Mahmood's saying, saving memories now have got more important and delivered easily. Agree. Thanks for that, Mahmood. And of course, you're more than welcome if you wanted to come in on yourself, but I'm happy to read those comments for you too. Thank you very much. My question or comment really to the panel, but just broadly, is, do we need Channel 4 for this? I understand very much the role of Channel 4, say, in the 80s or 90s. You know, I was a teenager of the 80s, coming of age, and Channel 4 was this landmark moment of it was going to speak for us. And, you know, to be fair, it has done some interesting and quite radical work over the years, others not less so. But we're also watching this film in 2020, we're having this conversation in 2020. And one of the things we've all done under the pandemic is we went online in various forms. We went online and watched things on Netflix. We discovered films and documentaries perhaps that we wouldn't have otherwise had time to do because we were busy catching buses and trains and running them from work. And also, I think the landscape of Channel 4 is also being changed and challenged as well. You know, its move out of London, the move to digital, the arrival of Amazon and Netflix. So do we need Channel 4? And is it because Channel 4 is kind of seen as this bastion? But in the age of the digital, in the age of YouTube, is there not other ways and other partners that we could bring on to disseminate the message? This is one for Tariq and Ken, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think that's the issue. It's irrelevant. The issue is this: Channel 4 represents the state. It represents the middle classes, and it represents the people that want to control the narrative of this country. I don't really care about the 80s and the 90s. I mean, I was there and they made great films, that's true. The fact that those great films are no longer available is important, because there's a whole generation who do not have that history of resistance on film available to them. That's very important. Marcia made a point about that. I think I just wanted to say something in terms of what was mentioned before, that Marcia spoke about the importance of families coming together and the possibility of a class action. And this is something which has been discussed now. And I know Claire asked the question originally. When we made the film, we were looking to see what had been happened before. And we were very aware of Malcolm X's speech at the United Nations, where he clearly said that the issue of America, of Black people in America, was not one of civil rights, but one of human rights. And so that was a very important point that he made, where it shifted the whole debate. And this is the kind of thing that has to happen now with this particular struggle. It has to be taken out of the UK, and families are actively talking about that kind of action as we speak, and it will happen. So, and I think Claire's right to say that the parameters that we fixed in, whether it's Channel 4 or the BBC or the state or the different elements of the state who decide whether these cases, at what level they should rise to and when they should fall, I think this is something which has to be in our control. So I absolutely condemn Channel 4 for their decision. And it's irrelevant whether they're based in Bristol or Manchester, online or offline, they're still making the same decision, and it's a cowardly decision.
Thank you, Kim. Marcia, were you raising your hand to come in? No? Oh, right, just, okay. Anybody else want to come in on that? Phil Scratton, please.
Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for this. And Ken and Tariq, thank you so much for showing the film again. I first saw it many years ago when you were first taking it around, and it was astonishing, really, today watching it, that I went through exactly the same emotions that I remember going through then. And I mean, for some people don't know the work that I do, but we first wrote about deaths in custody and coroner's inquests in 1987 in a book called In the Arms of the Law that Pluto published. And that book could be written absolutely today. And obviously, I know so many of the cases over this period. And I think that is, in one sense, gives me a counsel of despair. Then on a more positive side, I think we fought for years to have narrative verdicts in coroners' courts. And they have changed the complexion of courts. They have changed the complexion of a verdict. And I just want to be very quick on that. We had a death in custody here where a young man died in prison. And the case was clear. It was he took his own life. The responsibility lay with the prison. And we were able, in the course of that inquest, to bring out the facts. After 7 years of work with the family, we were able to bring out the facts. And there were 15 serious failures within the prison service revealed as a consequence. And they were named by the jury. So whilst I feel a counsel of despair at one level, there have been slight shifts. And I think it's how we can try and capitalize on those, on those shifts. And we can't expect the families, however articulate and however strong they are, we can't expect the families to carry that burden all the time. And I think it's how we try to move into a situation where we get that kind of verdict, as we did, and Marcia knows this only too well, as we did on the Hillsborough verdict. And the one thing that is positive that I do want to suggest, and it goes back to a point that I think Ken made, Guardian Australia is quite different to the Guardian here. And the Guardian Australia, and I was working on deaths in contested circumstances, particularly in the Aboriginal Torres Islander communities last year. They list every single death, and they get the account from the family. So those families' cases stand together, uncontested, as their words, and every single death is now catalogued. You can go online and you can read every one of them. We don't have that. In the north of Ireland, where I live and work, we have every single death from the conflict, over 3,000 deaths listed in a book called Lost Lives. And every single death stands as evidence about the state. And so if there's one thing positive that I feel I'd like to pull out of this and this discussion is how we can create a catalogue of all cases going right back to the 1980s when we founded Inquest and all of that started. How we can actually catalogue every case, but catalogue it in the sense of it's the family space. It's not an academic space. It's not a lawyer's space. It's the family space. And for me, the power of that would be really significant. So that was just one contribution I really wanted to get to. And it came out of this discussion and me thinking about lost lives and thinking about Guardian Australia. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment, Phil. Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions from the audience? Okay. I'm going to Janet, of course. Janet.
Matt, can I just say one thing? Like families over the years, we've actually seen things change, but not for the positive. For upcoming families, you know, for example, in the early 2000s, we was getting unlawful killing after unlawful killing after unlawful killing. But the last few years, we've seen this narrative verdict brought in since the Hillsborough deaths, which, as far as I'm concerned, from what I'm seeing, the coroners are using it more and more and more in these cases. And if anything, what it is doing, it's allowing the police to get away even more with what's going on. Because in an unlawful killing verdict, somebody's responsible and you've got a good chance of getting a manslaughter charge because it's the only criminal sanction in an inquest. But time and time again now, what coroners are doing is giving this narrative verdict all the ingredients of an unlawful killing verdict, and then the Crown prosecution at the end of it is able to say, well, you know, we can't see any signs of a criminal, you know, any criminality. So I think what used to happen is when we'd get an unlawful killing verdict, the police would then challenge us in court to try and get it squashed. And time again, they would fail. What's happened now, this narrative verdict has been brought in. None of the families yet have actually challenged that in court. But from what we are seeing, we're sitting and we're discussing this, a group of families, United Families Defence, and what we're seeing is it's enabling the police to get away with this, getting away with killing our loved ones.
From having a narrative myself, I have to agree with Janet. And now understanding the bigger picture with the support from other people, everything she said spot on. because I personally believe if proportionate force was put into my brother's inquest, I personally believe that it would have gone in a totally different direction, as where if they had it their own way, there would have been misadventure. And misadventure means that it was his choice to kill himself, when really and truthfully, we both know he never killed himself. All the narratives are not sufficient to accurately about what actually happened to them, which deters away from the facts. The same as within their investigations. They're not like proper investigations, so there's parts of the information that are wishy-washy. So we get fobbed off, basically. So the same things that Joy Gardner's family are waiting for are the same things ourselves are still waiting for. So despite the fact Janet's gone all the way to European court, and despite the fact she's got what she needs, she's now still in the position that I'm still in, and everybody's still at work, and everybody's still getting their pension, and everybody's still living their life. So the relevance to this, and the relevance to this film, is that people need to see part one, and Ken needs to do part two, and to do the flip of sides, because you will then get to see the bigger picture, because you're ignoring these factors. And by not putting it on Channel 4 as an open diversity and talking about other countries, what about our own country? We're all in this meeting because we all care about the same factors. If it wasn't a care factor, it wouldn't be up on the table. Sorry.
No, don't apologise.
I talk too much and I say sorry a lot.
That's a very English thing to do as well. So, but you know, that's who we are, possibly. But don't apologise, please not. And I think that really comes off really nicely with what Phil's just said. This repository, this recording. Do we do that online through websites, or actually does a more semi-official body like a newspaper or someone get on board and does that for us on a daily or weekly or however long it takes? Marcia, so I understand Marcia wanted to come in, and I think we'll make this the last comment or question. Marcia.
Sorry, I'm very sorry. I need to go, but I felt that, you know, just so that you know why I carry on doing the work that I do, in the words of James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it isn't faced. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye and take good care.
Thank you very much for joining us, Marcia. Thank you. Good evening to you. Bye-bye. Okay. And I think that's a lovely note. James Baldwin, we've seen Injustice, we've had some wonderful discussions, some enlightening conversation, but also I've certainly learnt a lot about those points of law, if you like, along the way, that clearly tells us there's a lot more work to be done. And is there a part two? I don't know. That's one for Tariq and Ken to think about. But lovely words there from...
we're not thinking about it. We've actually done it.
You've actually made a part two.
Yes, and it's going to be released in October. We need a little bit more support to get it finished. And there's a link that's just been put in by Michelle. Thanks, Michelle, for people that want to support the film. We've had a very interesting discussion, but underneath the surface between us and the families, there's a lot more going on. And there'll be the opportunity for anybody who's listening today to get involved to support the next stage of our attack on the state, because I think we're all talking from a very defensive point of view. Well, we're not actually. But we're talking in that terms of, you know, we're asking for this and we're asking for that. And the point for me in terms of film and documentary is that for me, a film, if 30 years ago, I may have picked up a gun, I've picked up a camera instead. And that's a very important, you know, thing, that a film is a weapon. It's a tool for the masses. And on that note, I'll just invite people to be part of the next part of Injustice, which will be released in October, and a third part is already being filmed as well, and will be put together for next year. So the struggle definitely continues for us and for the families.
Those of you who haven't had the opportunity, those links that we were talking about, they are in the chat box, and I understand that the moderators, Michelle and Caris, will try and possibly circulate them to all afterwards. But if not, they're certainly in the chat box currently if you wanted to have a quick look at them, and you can copy and paste them to either a Word document or into your web browsers as well. I just wanted to say thank you very much to our panellists, to Janet and Marcia, Janet is still with us, but Marcia had to leave. Thank you very much for your time, for your insights and your continued energy and your passion in politics in carrying this on. So thank you very much. And of course, to Tariq and Ken, the filmmakers, for this. And again, thank you all once again, all of you, for joining us from near and far, from wherever you've been, for your contributions, your questions and comments, and to Michelle, Caris and other teams behind the scene making this possible. So I think we should sign off here. Thank you ever so much, everybody, and good evening to everyone.
Bye now.